everybody, and welcome to another historic kind of video. I'm here with Frostbite,
Hello.
and since we have finals coming up, I thought I'd be making some videos for finals. Um, this will this will be on a new playlist, and I will add my previous videos for uh, World War I to that playlist. So yeah, let's get started. Uh, Before we actually talk about Napoleonic Warfare, uh, let's actually first to know about Napoleon himself. So before we get, since the actual type of warfare is named after him, we're gonna have to learn more about him. Uh, he was born on Corsica, which at that point in time was fighting for its independence from France. Napoleon grew up hating the French. Ironic, because he would one day rule them. Uh, and he hated his father for giving up on Corsica and siding with the French. He became a slightly more wealthy man and kind of a lesser noble because he was basically a French representative. They were actually, his entire family was kind of shunned in the village. So, yeah. Um, later in his life, his, and he, later in his life, he moved to France, and this made his father, through a bunch of back deals. The military school that his father got him into through these back deals was called École Militaire. It's French, so I'm sorry if I butchered it. This was a military school which was primarily for very prestigious people. Here is where Napoleon learned pretty much everything he knew about war. Although his father got him into this school, he still didn't like his father that much for giving up on Corsica. Even though his father was doing this specifically so his sons would have a better life. Um, the field in which Napoleon got into, well, in the military that he got into was the artillery, which is basically the people who fire the very big guns and all the cannons. And Napoleon's role model was Pascal Paoli, and we'll talk about him later. The only reason I know how to say Paoli is because I live in Pennsylvania, and there's a little bit of a township that's called Paoli. Uh, so, at this time, France was a little bit at war. The first place that Napoleon showed his stripes was called the Siege of Toulon. It was where he proposed this suicidal mission, almost. Uh, he proposed this almost suicidal mission to Navy commanders that you go up and shoot at the mountains and run them down. And nobody would listen to him, even though he was the only one with even a plan. Except for this one person. And this one person said, "That's a wonderful idea. Let's do it." And they won with that plan. Uh, at this time, since it was going through the French Revolution, the French, at this time, France was ruled by the Directory, which was it was kind of the band-aid type of government that replaced the Board of Public Safety. And it didn't last too long because pretty soon after, the siege of Toulon, the Directory is in trouble. Napoleon was the only person in France, and people were going to storm the Directory. So they were like, Napoleon, help us. And he's like, oh, so now you notice me. So he goes, stops this riot, and this was known as Whiff of Grape Shot, or 13 Vendée. And ironically, it wasn't a whiff of grape shot, because grape shot was used on cannons for a ship. So, not very aptly named. So, Napoleon also at this time fell in love, and the woman he fell in love with was named Josephine de Barras. He eventually married her, and
Didn't she cheat on him or something?
I believe so, but don't get let's not get ahead of ourselves. At this time, Napoleon became head of the Army of Italy, which was an army sent to Italy to take on Austria, which was being a very big prick to France at the time. And with this basically attack on the Austrians, he truly proved himself and his military might, being that he didn't have too many men. Yet through strategy, he beat the Austrians. And the strategy that I'm talking about is Napoleonic Warfare. And Napoleonic Warfare is using strategy and tactics. Strategy and tactics, as he said, were two different things. Strategy was preparing for the battle, and tactics was fighting the battle. In military theory, strategy is the utilization during both peace and war of all the nation's forces through large-scale, long-range planning and development to ensure security and victory. However, tactics, or more specifically military tactics, are the science and art of organizing a military force, and the techniques of using said force and using weapons and military units to engage and defeat the enemy in battle. Karl von Clausewitz, I am sorry if I butchered that name, the great Prussian interpreter and philosopher of war, pronounced Napoleon the god of war. Or if you like to think of it as planets, you could think of him as Mars. Napoleon was not a revolutionary in the weaponry he used. In fact, he did not use too much advanced technology. I mean, he was using cannons. I mean, like cannons. And still used bayonets and cavalry charges. But what he did, however, was change how wars were fought. And his campaign set patterns for mobile offenses and ruthless styles of war called Napoleon. Into the centuries before the French Revolution, wars had become formal affairs. They had been pursued with limited means for limited objectives, and highly trained and brutal disciplinary professional armies. Battles were avoided because heavy casualties coupled with desertion proved too costly for victors and vanquished alike. Wars commonly ended with exhaustion and finances and manpower rather than decisive battle. The changing nature of war was surplus farming, thanks to Columbian Exchange, caused a rapid population increase in Europe. France soon emerged as one of the most popular European countries. We can thank, and for that we can thank the all-American potato and corn. America! Land of the free and home of the potato. I can butcher that. I am American. Don't judge me. I'm also I'm also part Irish, so I can make fun of the potato. Uh, the advent of the Industrial Revolution meant that military supplies and weapons could be mass produced. Uh, unfortunately, I'm going off track here, but in Russia, it was harder for them to mass produce stuff. That's why Russians were notoriously ill-equipped. Because they had more manpower, but not a lot of production power. And the expansion of trade and overseas colonies improved taxation methods, which increased the financial capabilities for nations to have wars. Meaning, hey, we have excess money. Want to go to war? Sure, I have nothing else better to do. Also, political changes. Large professional armies were viewed as symbols of absolute monarchs and were way too expensive. Growing nations in Europe, combined with those nations who needed self-defense, led to the conscription of men from the population or public. Meaning, if you want to live in this country, you have to serve this country. Meaning, if we go to war, you have to fight for this country and possibly even die for this country. Viva la French. In France, this was referred to as leve en masse. The violence of the revolution meant that much of the noble officers either died or fled the country. This created the new breed of officer. You bet it, Napoleon. The type of officers who achieved their positions based on merit, not through blood. This also changed the armies in another way. Instead of one massive army on the march, commanders would split up their armies into fully autonomous divisions of men who would march in parallel lines to one another. This could also be called platoons or troops or corps. This eliminated many logistic concerns of the army and greatly increased the mobility of a fighting force. It also increased how well an army could be organized and how tactics could be used. Napoleon put into practice military theories that the French had developed but never tried. His corps would move in a diamond formation, never more than one day a march from each other. This was so that if if the troop in the back was attacked, that means that a few men from that troop could run ahead super fast within a day and tell the troops ahead of them about this. If they were attacked in the middle, they could go both ways and inform both of their allies. Or if the front, they could just move back. When in a column, they would come into contact with the enemy. They would hold them in a place long enough for other three to be brought in battle as well. Napoleon's columns were incredibly useful. The armies that would march into columns would deploy into lines when met into battle. And remember, a column is lateral, and a line is horizontal. This was key to make a defensive wall. He also had perhaps the greatest uses of men, an Adjouris Square. This was basically, as it sounds, a square of infantrymen surrounding in all directions. The wounded and the supplies and commanders would sit in the middle, and they would fire off in line. Rifles would also have bayonets. The first line would fire, and while they were reloading, the second line would fire, and while the other two were still loading, the third, and so on and so on. We will continue this in the next video. I hope this helped, and have a wonderful day. Bye! Say goodbye.